What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Wednesday, February 10th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at the point guard position. So I like Luka Doncic from the Dallas Mavericks playing the Atlanta Hawks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Luka Doncic has averaged 52.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 35 minutes per game with a 36% usage rate. He scored 39, 63, and 41 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 37, 38, and 32 minutes. He's projected at 54.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's $10,900 FanDuel salary and 100 less on DraftKings. So I like this pick because Luka Doncic scored 63 fantasy points in his last game versus the Atlanta Hawks. It's a fast-paced game. It's a great matchup. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 233.5 points scored in this game. So I like Luka Doncic here versus the Atlanta Hawks. Another point guard that I like, especially on FanDuel, is Dennis Schroeder from the LA Lakers playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the second worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Dennis Schroeder has averaged 26.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. He scored 40, 36, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 37, 40, and 29 minutes. He's projected at 27.7 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's $5,700 FanDuel salary and 500 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price. Dennis Schroeder has scored 40, 30, and 31 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. So I think he makes a nice FanDuel play here. So I like Dennis Schroeder here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. I like Kevin Huerter from the Atlanta Hawks playing the Dallas Mavericks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing shooting guards. Kevin Huerter has averaged 24.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 17% usage rate. He scored 27, 28, and 46 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 36, 33, and 38 minutes. He's projected at 26.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.3 times value. He's $5,000 FanDuel salary and 600 more on DraftKings. So he's scored 46, 27, 27, and 24 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Dallas Mavericks. So I think he makes a great FanDuel play where he only needs 25 fantasy points to get you 5 times value. So I like Kevin Huerter here versus the Dallas Mavericks. Another shooting guard that I like is Dillon Brooks from the Memphis Grizzlies playing the Charlotte Hornets, who have the 5th worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Dillon Brooks has averaged 26.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 38, 19, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 36, 28, and 27 minutes. He's projected at 26.6 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.1 times value. He's 5,200 FanDuel salary and 300 more on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 226 points scored in this game, and Dillon Brooks has scored 35, 22, and 33 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Charlotte Hornets. So this is a great matchup. He has good player versus team history, so I like Dillon Brooks here versus the Charlotte Hornets. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. I'm going to give you a value play here. I like Josh Hart from the New Orleans Pelicans playing the Chicago Bulls, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 13th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Josh Hart has averaged 23.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 28 minutes per game with a 12% usage rate. He scored 52, 12, and 25 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 40, 27, and 23 minutes. He's projected at 23.6 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.7 times value. He's 4,100 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. So Josh Hart has scored 33 and 30 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Chicago Bulls. And Vegas thinks that there's going to be 230 points scored in this game. So we got a high scoring game. Now, Josh Hart is on a back-to-back, and he played 40 minutes yesterday, but his salary is low enough. He's got a low floor, but he's got a huge ceiling. So I like Josh Hart here versus the Chicago Bulls. Okay, another small forward that I like is Will Barton from the Denver Nuggets playing the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing small forwards. Will Barton has averaged 23.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with an 18% usage rate. He scored 34, 20, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 38, 37, and 36 minutes. So those are monster minutes, and his salary is still pretty low. He's had some bad games this season. He seems to flop every time I play him, but if he's playing between 36 and 38 minutes, you gotta hope that he can get you at least 5 times value here. So he's projected at 25.9 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's gonna need about 27 fantasy points to get you 5 times value or more. He's 5,400 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. The main reason I like this play is just because he's playing monster minutes. He's got the opportunity to score 30 plus fantasy points and crush value here. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 223.5 points scored in this game. And he scored 36 and 41 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I like Will Barton here versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Another small forward that I like is Dorian Finney-Smith, a value play for you. Dorian Finney-Smith, he's averaged 19.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 12% usage rate. He scored 25, 19, and 13 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 35, and 26 minutes. He's projected at 20.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's 4,200 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. So he's got a nice matchup here. The Atlanta Hawks have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. And he scored 21, 19, 45, and 32 fantasy points in the last 4 games versus the Atlanta Hawks. And we know Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 233.5 points scored in this game. So I like Dorian Finney-Smith as a value play here versus the Atlanta Hawks. Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I like Chris Boucher from the Toronto Raptors playing the Washington Wizards, who have the third worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing power forwards, Chris Boucher has averaged 29.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 23 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. He scored 32, 48, and 34 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 29, 32, and 26 minutes. So his minutes per game are up, his production has been up, and he's projected at 31.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.2 times value. He's 6,000 FanDuel salary and 100 less on DraftKings. So Vegas thinks there's going to be 229.5 points scored in this game. We know this is going to be a fast-paced game, so I like Chris Boucher here versus the Washington Wizards. Okay, another power forward that I like, especially on DraftKings, is Jarrett Allen from the Cleveland Cavaliers playing the Denver Nuggets, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing power forwards, but Jarrett Allen has averaged 29.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 16% usage rate. He scored 25, 13, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 34, 24, and 21 minutes. Now he's projected at 30.8 fantasy points here tonight. On FanDuel, that's only 4.8 times value because he's 6,400 FanDuel salary, but he's 600 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. So I like Jarrett Allen here versus the Denver Nuggets. Okay, moving on to the center position. I like Andre Drummond from the Cleveland Cavaliers playing the Denver Nuggets, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing centers, but Andre Drummond has averaged 44.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 32% usage rate. He scored 49, 46, and 40 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 35, 30, and 29 minutes. He's projected at 44.5 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.8 times value. He's been a smash FanDuel play the last 3, 4, or 5 games. He's been putting up 40 plus fantasy points, and he's still only 7,700 FanDuel salary. That's 5.8 times value. Now he's 600 more on DraftKings, but he can still hit value on DraftKings. So I like Andre Drummond here versus the Denver Nuggets. Now, if you want a value play at the center position, high risk, high reward, but take a look at Willy Hernangomez from the New Orleans Pelicans playing the Chicago Bulls, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing centers. Willy Hernangomez has averaged 17 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 15 minutes per game with a 15% usage rate. He scored 38, 15, and 20 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 24, 18, and 17 minutes. So his minutes were up last game, but they've been okay, a little bit over his average. You want him to get at least 20 minutes here in this game. He's projected at 20.9 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.7 times value. He's 3,700 FanDuel salary and 300 less on DraftKings. So I see some pretty big upside. If he can get 20 minutes or more, he could crush value here tonight, but he could also get 15, 16 minutes and get you a 15 and not hit value and crush and destroy your lineup. But Vegas thinks there's going to be 230 points scored in this game. So I like Willy Hernangomez here versus the Chicago Bulls. And you know what? Even on DraftKings, because he's only 3,400 DraftKings salary, even if he only gets you 15 to 20 fantasy points, he's not going to crush your lineup. He may hurt your lineup if he only scores 15, but I don't think he's going to take you out of the money. So the more I look at it, especially on DraftKings, with Vegas thinking there's going to be 230 points scored in this game, I think he makes a really nice risk here for a DraftKings value play when you're looking at the risk to reward. So yeah, I like Willy Hernangomez, especially on DraftKings here versus the Chicago Bulls. Okay, another center that I like here tonight is Montrezl Harrell from the LA Lakers playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the second worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Montrezl Harrell has averaged 25.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 25 minutes per game with a 19% usage rate. He scored 34, 26, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 30, 24, and 24 minutes. He's projected at 26.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's 5,400 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. Now, Montrezl Harrell has scored 34, 30, 21, and 28 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 219 points scored in this game. Great matchup here. So I like Montrezl Harrell here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Oh, and just before I click off, I just noticed this. Miles Turner on DraftKings is only 6,000 DraftKings salary. He's averaging 36.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 17% usage rate. He's projected at 34 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's only 5 times value because he's 6,800 FanDuel salary, but he's 800 less on DraftKings. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 234.5 points scored in this game. Great matchup here. Excellent FanDuel price. So I think Miles Turner makes a great DraftKings play here tonight. So I like Miles Turner here versus the Brooklyn Nets. If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.